Arvind is Assistant Professor of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University. He is a member of the Center of Work, Technology, and Organization, the Stanford Technology Ventures Program, and a faculty affiliate of the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. His current research focuses on human AI augmentation in the workplace and its organizational impact. Arvind is presently working on a new course for our digital transformation program, and it will be released later on this year. Welcome, Arvind.
Thank you.
Let's get right going with this little hiccup to begin with. Our first question in this fireside chat is to start. Could you talk about what are the emerging capabilities and challenges or risks of using generative AI in a workplace context?
Thank you. Thanks, Anita. Super excited to be here. So there are a lot of emerging capabilities as we are finding out every day. Like people are discovering new use cases of generative AI. But if we sort of try to understand the technology a bit more, what is generative AI? Essentially, Gen AI is enabled by large language models or foundational models, as they're called, trained on a broad set of like structured and unstructured data. It essentially data that we find on the internet. A lot of these LLMs are trained, at least the ones we have. They could also be trained specifically to a vertical. Say there's one now for finance. There's going to be another for the medical industry, medical profession. So that's going to also change how people are going to use these technologies. But looking across, we could think of two broad use cases, right, or two categories, if you will. One is around generating content. The another is around extracting, summarizing, or predicting information, right? So these are two broad categories, at least as of now, on the use of generative AI, the capabilities. With respect to generating content, it is about anything from generating a personalized image or video, or converting like a text to a video, generating music. So there are like a lot of applications with respect to generating content. And this was the part that people were quite surprised by earlier on. If you ask someone about AI and what the potential capabilities are and where it would affect, creative industries were not the first it was not the first that came to people's mind, right? People thought, okay, maybe these could be used in automating routine tasks and more like lower level tasks that does not involve a lot of discretion and creativity. But generating content is one of the biggest capabilities of generative AI. The second use case, which is about extracting, summarizing content, essentially. So if you have like a quarterly report or any form of you have like a recording of a meeting, it's quite good at summarizing that text, right? And all the way from reasoning about text, images, to having some form of chatbots where you train on all the customer issues your company or product had faced in the past, and you could generate these automatic chatbots to essentially accelerate the customer service process, right? So these are the two broad: generating content, extracting, summarizing, predicting information are the two broad use cases. And within that, we are seeing industry-specific how these technologies are being used, adapted. So the legal industry, for instance, is one that is getting impacted a lot because that is dependent on, it's a very text-heavy industry. And industries, organizations that rely on functions that rely a lot on text and images and language more broadly, those are the functions, at least as of now, are impacted the most, right? Legal industry, the paralegals are using generative AI a lot to discover legal precedents, to generate contracts, NDAs, and stuff like that. In advertisement agencies and more creative industries, graphic designers are already using these technologies, copywriters to generate a lot of options, slogans for their clients. So these are at the very high level. These are some of the emerging capabilities of AI. And as we use it, I think the important point I want to I want to sort of emphasize is these use cases, nobody could find them out ahead of time. It is discovered in use as you do the work, as you augment your work with these technologies like ChatGPT and DALI and Bot and others. You would discover new ones. All right. So those are the capabilities. People are also organizations are using them to what they call as associate listening, which is basically like an employment survey across the company. Before, these would be like multiple choice questions, and there will not be enough like free form questions where people can say, okay, what are some of the issues in the company and what do they want? Because it's very hard to analyze them. Imagine if it is like a 5,000 member company. Now it is quite easy to do that, to summarize, find patterns in text, to categorize the text, and so forth. So those are the capabilities. With respect to the risks, already people have been talking about it. The biggest risk is what scholars of AI call as the hallucination problem, right? So essentially, it is these technologies generate newer content with a lot of confidence or like sounding very confidently, but it is just made up content, right? So for instance, if I went and asked one of these Gen AI chatbots to generate a biography of me or anyone else, any of my colleagues, it gets it completely wrong from even the basic facts, right? So that's the problem, the hallucination problem. But if you use it for more serious tasks, say research tasks, it gets like, it sometimes like invents content with a very confident voice. So there is always some element of humans involved. The humans need to be there to cross-check these technologies. So that's the first risk. The second is related to copyright and IP, and especially if you're a large company or even a freelancer trying to generate content. Sometimes there is a risk of copyright and IP, especially on what these LLMs are trained on, right? So there's already been an issue, and some companies have tried against using these technologies to generate new images, right? For legal reasons. The third risk is related to privacy, especially if you're trying to generate code. So there are companies again that have like cut off access to these ChatGPT and other chatbots in part due to privacy concerns. They don't want to expose their own code or use unverified code generated by these technologies. And the final risk is related to numerical reasoning. So as I mentioned, these technologies are trained like large language-based content. So it's very good at like language-related tasks, image-related tasks. But with respect to numerical reasoning, even so simple sort of arithmetic to all the way to more advanced like integer programming or advanced numerical reasoning, it's still not there. It's still a work in progress. So the numerical reasoning, I would be like careful or have some human in the loop to verify the results that the technology is producing. It is very good at consolidating data sets and merging data sets, finding patterns, but numerical reasoning, it is still not there. So I would caution there's some kind of a risk associated with that. So these are the four risks I could think about: hallucination, copyright, privacy, numerical reasoning. Anita.
Excellent.
Yes.
That was very helpful. And thank you for bringing it all together. We see a lot of news and articles on the topic, and it's great that you brought it all together for everybody. Next question. How do we cut through the current hype, right? All this news and information that's coming out, all of what's the real thing that's going to happen? What do you think might happen? So current hype around AI, ChatGPT, and how do we appreciate the potential? We're getting questions about this. How do we appreciate the potential of generative AI for the future of work?
Yeah, great question. So essentially, as I mentioned, the use cases are discovered as people are doing their work. It's not that they could sit and think through. I mean, some of it they might, but a lot of the tasks that people do, the potential is discovered as people are like using these technologies. So I'd give an example on what facilitates this creative use of generative AI as opposed to what hinders that. And this is actually based on some research that we are currently doing in multiple companies. So this is a use of generative AI in a corporate law firm. So this is used to corporate law firms, as you know, generate a lot of contracts and NDAs and documents. It's a very document heavy industry. So the paralegals are the ones who are responsible for generating contracts and service level agreements and NDAs for the client, which takes a substantial amount of time because each client has specific unique capabilities. So this organization adopted a tool. This is even before ChatGPT. There were other vertical specific generative AI technologies. This is specific to the legal industry. So they used this as a test case to find out, okay, what could be, what are the new application areas, use cases for this technology. And they found the first use case was around very simple, generating non-disclosure agreements for clients, putting together contracts, like by merging multiple different contracts in the past. So that was the first use case. And this law firm, two different subdivisions, the same law firm adopted the technology, very similar in many structural dimensions. One of the subdivisions, the paralegals were using this technology a lot more. They were discovering new use cases. They were, for example, discovering new use cases around, oh, I could use this technology not just to construct contracts and NDAs, but also to, find legal precedent or do some background legal research, because all of that is textual data that the model could be trained on. The other division, people were the paralegals were resisting using the technology. Right? They don't want to use it, or they were finding some kind of issues with it. Right? So we got very curious on why is this the case. It's the same company, same technology. The two subdivisions are also more or less the same, similar type of paralegals too. And that's where we found the important role that managers played, the managers in these two subdivisions. In the subdivision where there was lot more adoption and use, the paralegals were discovering new use cases that they haven't thought of before, or the organization hasn't thought of, or even the technology vendor hasn't thought of. In that subdivision, the managers were signaling possibility of reskilling their job, to essentially rediscovering what a paralegal is today, right? It's less about routine work, less about contracts, due diligence, stuff like that. The signaling was try to discover new use cases that makes your job easier, or at least the task that you hate to do. Or could you do something? Could you augment that with these technologies? And there was less emphasis on consolidation. Are we going to are we going to replace some of you? So that rhetoric was not there in that first subdivision, where we saw a lot of use and a lot of experimentation. In the division where there was less adoption and use, the signal that managers sent was less so around reskilling or upskilling, right? They were not saying, okay, we would use this technology as an opportunity for you to rediscover your job or your role. So there, the people got it sort of invoked a threat frame to those paralegals, right? They were not willing to experiment with the technology and the process. They were not able to discover new use cases, or even if they did discover an experiment, they were not willing to share it widely with their other colleagues, other paralegals, or their managers, right? So I think the broader point here is the managers are going to play a much more important role than we think in appreciating the potential of the generative AI, because these gets discovered in use, right? Nobody could plan ahead of time. But having said that, the one thing I would sort of suggest is, if you're an employee or a worker, it's important to think about, do some form of a task inventory, right? What are the tasks that you do? There might be a job description about you that says these are the tasks you do, but then there might be a lot more stuff that you do beyond that, right? Doing that, essentially then trying to figure out what are the tasks that could be augmented by these technologies, and what are the tasks that you want to do in the future that you're not doing, something that you're passionate about. For example, in the paralegals case, they wanted to be involved more in the client-facing business too. They want to get involved in the legal strategy meetings and a lot more like upskill tasks. Likewise, what are the tasks that you're not currently doing, you want to do, that so that sort of you could use generative AI to enable that. So that's another way to think about it, doing a task inventory and thinking about the potential of how would you augment your current skills with the technology, right? So these are the two things I would say. In order to appreciate the potential, you have to use it, and the managers need to sort of be supportive of the use and experimentation of these technologies. Sunita.
Great. I'm looking at the questions that are coming in, and you're already answering a number of them. It's great to see everybody thinking a little bit a step ahead of what Arvind's talking about, and then hopefully your questions are getting answered. One more question. Let's see if we could squeeze in one more question.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see here. What are some of the best practices of human AI augmentation that have worked so far?
Yeah.
Where have we
Great.
seen positive, constructive impact?
Great. So I would say the biggest resistance, what I call as the last mile problem of AI, right? The people who needs to use this technology, they are like not trusting it enough, or they don't want to experiment, or they experience this threat frame that this technology is going to replace me or going to make my job a lot less important. So that is a prominent reason why, or maybe the technology is not there yet. Initially, it might get better, but it will only get better and people use it, give their feedback, right? So these are the barriers. So the best practice that I've seen work, especially to drive more use experimentation of AI, is to start, if you're a manager or organization, to start with the task that people hate to do, right? So that's the task that you could use these technologies, ask them to sort of find ways to augment, automate that. And there people would be pretty receptive to that, right? Because that's a task that they already hate to do. For the paralegals case, again, it's not that there's not a lot of fun generating contracts and NDAs, like given the skills of the paralegals. So that's one best practice. Start with the task that's like people hate to do. The second is related to what I mentioned, trying to come up with a task inventory of like what kind of stuff that people do, and map out the dependencies between the tasks, especially in an organizational context. It is not one individual doing all the stuff without any dependencies on others. There's a lot of coordination back and forth. So you might be okay with experimenting using these technologies, but your colleague might not, or your downstream colleague might not, right? So trying to map out those dependencies earlier on, that is also helpful. So I call this the task augmentation problem. Essentially, within a job, there are multiple tasks. Only some of them could be automated or augmented using AI, not all. So trying to figure out what they are and map out the dependencies. And the last one is around the role of managers, the best practice. When the managers started to signal consolidation or replacement, if that is where the narrative that they're trying to set, that then definitely the use of AI would reduce, the diffusion, adoption of AI by the people who are supposed to experiment with these technologies. That would reduce. But if they signal something, I mean, they cannot promise that there'll be no consolidation or no job replacement, but at least if they signal that there are opportunities to rethink, reimagine your job, what you ideally want to do, and potential for reskilling and upskilling your job, that drives people to experiment a lot more, share their insights. And a lot of these insights are collectively shared, and that's how the capabilities of the technologies too are discovered in practice. So I think these are the three best practices, I would say.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and take one question from the audience. If you were a young professional, you are a young professional. For the young professionals in our audience, what would you recommend they study now with this generative AI and
Mhm.
And then the other question that has popped up a couple times is how is this being used in education? How is it going to change education? Um,
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
so how do you prepare the new professionals of the future? And then
Yeah. Yeah.
how are you
Yeah.
teaching maybe differently?
Yeah. So I'd start with the first one on what you should focus on, and I cannot give a blanket answer. Depends on your area, what your sort of current interests are, and so forth. But essentially, I would uh, encourage whatever your job is, trying to see how you could augment these technologies, right? Generative AI as a part of your workflow. So that's the one thing I would suggest. And there are like courses around that on how do you use generative AI as a part of your work. So that's something, and maybe like a baseline understanding of what these technologies are capable of or not capable of could also be helpful to figure out, okay, where you could best use this technology and where this is not a really good fit, at least at this point in time. So that's all that I could say as of now. The question on education, and we are trying to experiment a lot at Stanford and rethink, how we teach our courses, but also what kind of like assignments that we should give to students. Should we sort of cut off like access to ChatGPT, or are there other ways to rethink how we sort of test students, test their skills? My perspective, and I use this in my courses, is to actually allow students to use these technologies. If they want to write an essay or any form of assignment, a presentation for that matter, they are allowed to use it, but then they also have to be very reflective of the process and training them to write good prompts. I've been like teaching a course on that, like how do you write good prompts, at least a few sessions on that. So that's going to be an important skill. And then owning the content, like how do you do cross verification, especially given the hallucination problem I talked about, right? So how do you do that? That's another. How do you essentially fact check and make sure that whatever you're producing is like solid, it's robust in content. The third is how do you integrate all of these to your own sort of workflow, right? The students are going to go into workplace. So I'm trying to structure the assignments in a manner that they could use ChatGPT, and there will be some kind of task where you would not be able to use it. The questions are framed in a manner that it involves a lot more research and going to the library or like just critical thinking. So how do you integrate this too? So those are the things that I try to teach, and they need to also write a reflect to like one page, like reflections on their use of this technology, what they learned, what worked, what didn't work, how did they experiment, right? So I think that's what I would suggest to for even for employees doing their work. Cutting off access is not probably a great idea. Of course, there are, given the privacy and other risks, organizations might take a different route, but allowing people to experiment is the best possible route to go.
Great, thanks. It's somebody made a comment, and
Mhm.
rightfully so. Not just young professionals, all professionals. Those of us have been around for some time
Yeah,
need to learn the new technology and how we can use it to
yeah,
better the experience and in our environments and for the future, and do it in
yeah,
a way that's safe and
yeah.
equitable.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Can I add like one quick point? So
Absolutely.
given this a chatbot, I think one of the issues that I'm seeing among my students, but also others, is uh, given the how we are used to doing search, like using search engines and giving like search keywords, people are using a very similar approach when they use these chatbots, ChatGPT bot, or any of these. It's not a search engine. Like if you write a prompt as a search keyword, it is not super effective, right? So that's why I emphasize the importance of prompt engineering. How do you write a good prompt? And therefore, to understand the technology more would help you to write better prompts too. So a move from like a search keywords and search queries to prompts is going to be an important skill for all people to learn, irrespective of like young, old.
Excellent advice. Thank you. We are coming to the end of the webinar. I want to thank everybody who joined at the start of it and hung in there as we got going. And I do want to remind everybody that Arvind is in the process of developing a new course for the digital transformation program. It should be out this fall. That's what we're targeting. And
Yeah. A lot
if
of it is
you,
focused on AI, a lot of it on like AI and how to write prompts and stuff like that.
awesome. And then in the meantime, if you want to, we would recommend get started on your digital transformation certificate now. There are 4 core courses that we recommend everybody take as you start the program. And then by the time Arvind's course goes live, you'll be ready to go. If you have further questions about the program or the learning journey with the digital transformation program, please feel free to reach out to us via email or chat. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Arvind, thank you, for joining us today and sharing what you're seeing, not only in academia, but also the experience that you're doing with the work that you're doing in industry. So thank you, everybody, and we wish you all a great day.